little bit of a hot take for you today about the Church of Latter-day Saints going after the podcaster behind the show Mormon Stories. Right back after this. All right, the Mormon Stories lawsuit. This is what every podcaster really needs to know about this kind of a thing. So what if I told you that one of the longest running podcasts in America is being sued, not for defamation, not for copyright infringement, but because of its name? Well, that is exactly what is happening in the lawsuit between the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and the Mormon Stories podcast. Now, before you click away because you think this is about religion, no, it's not. It really isn't, at least not from my perspective. As an entertainment and media lawyer for, over, about 30 years now, this is not a case about trademarks. This is a case about, it's not a case about religion. It's a case about trademarks. I have been seeing this kind of thing coming up more and more lately. It's about brand identity, about business assets, and a question every podcaster really should be asking: who really owns the name of the show? So today I want to walk you through what's happening, why it matters, and the lessons every podcaster and creator business should take away from this case. Well, I'm Gordon Firemark, as you know, the podcast lawyer, and I help podcasters and creator businesses protect what they build. And this lawsuit involves one particular podcast and one particular religious organization, but the legal issues at stake here really could affect anyone building a media brand. So let's just jump right in. Here are the facts of the story, very briefly. The church has sued John Dalen and the Mormon Stories podcast for trademark infringement and related claims. The church owns a portfolio of federally registered trademarks that include the word Mormon in connection with various goods and services, including media and educational services. Now, the church's basic claim is that the podcast's name and branding and logos and presentation are likely to create confusion about whether the podcast is affiliated with or endorsed by the church. So John Dalen, the defendant, has now filed his answer and counterclaims. His response includes several major arguments. First, that the word Mormon is one that belongs to the public. Second, that the church itself spent years discouraging use of the term Mormon. Third, that the church waited roughly 20 years before filing the suit. And finally, that several of the church's trademark registrations should actually be canceled. None of these arguments has yet been accepted or rejected by the court. At this stage, they are just competing legal positions. And that is what's important. We have to remember, whenever we're talking about pending litigation, they are just accusations, charges, allegations. But here's where I think much of the media coverage of the story has been missing the point. Most of that coverage frames this as a dispute about religion. But I think it's really about something a lot bigger. See, podcasting has grown up. It's a mature industry now. 20 years ago, this was mainly a hobby for people. But today, it's business. These are brands. These are intellectual property. They're acquisition targets, the shows. They're valuable commercial assets. And as podcasting has matured, we're seeing something inevitable. That's these kinds of trademark disputes. It isn't the first, and this won't be the last, that's for sure. So, one of the biggest mistakes I see creators make is treating the podcast like it's just a clever name, the title. It's much more than that, though. It is a brand. It's your brand. It's your search traffic, your RSS feed, your YouTube channel, your reputation, your merchandise, your sponsorship value, your goodwill, your audience's trust, all of that. If your podcast succeeds, the name itself may become one of your company's most valuable assets. That's why choosing and protecting that name matters. Trademark law isn't about owning words. One thing I'd like to clear up, because I see it misunderstood constantly, is that the law doesn't really let people own or claim full ownership of a word or words. It protects these words when they're used as identifiers of commercial source. The question isn't who owns the word. The question is, when consumers see that word used in connection with particular goods or services, who do they think those goods or services are coming from? That's the concept known as likelihood of confusion, and it's the heart of almost every trademark lawsuit. Now, another misconception is that whoever registered first automatically wins, and that is simply not true. Courts look at questions like whether the mark is distinctive, whether it's descriptive, has it acquired a secondary meaning in the mind of the consuming public, and who has priority, how is the mark actually used? Is there any evidence of actual consumer confusion? Those are factual questions. So the registration is important, but it is definitely not the entire case. So, what is the church actually claiming? This is also being oversimplified online. They're not literally claiming ownership of the word Mormon. They are asserting rights in registered trademarks that contain that word for particular goods and services. That's an important distinction. Now, one registration I'd be looking at closely is the one covering Book of Mormon Stories, because that reportedly includes podcast related services. That's where the details really start to matter. The exact wording, the filing dates, the claimed services, and the dates of first use. All those facts can become significant in these kinds of cases. Another thing that jumped out at me is that this lawsuit isn't only about the title, it's also about logos, graphics, visual identity, the overall presentation. And that's because trademark law looks at the commercial impression created by the entire brand. Sometimes two businesses can use similar words without any problems. But when similar names are paired with similar branding, color schemes, shapes, patterns, designs, those kinds of things, then likelihood of confusion can increase. So here's the issue that fascinates me most. Personally, I think the most interesting issue isn't whether the word Mormon belongs to the public. It's whether the church waited too long. And this brings us to a bunch of defenses. They're called equitable defenses in the law. One is called laches, one is called acquiescence, one is called equitable estoppel. They're all related, but they're not exactly the same thing. Laches basically asks three questions. Did the trademark owner know? Did they wait an unreasonable amount of time? And did that delay unfairly prejudice the defendant? Notice what's not on that list. There's no magic number of years. 20 years sounds dramatic, but simply waiting isn't enough. The real question becomes, what happened during those 20 years? Prejudice. Imagine spending 20 years building that podcast. You create a website, a YouTube channel, books, merchandise, not to mention the podcasts themselves, the sponsors, the SEO, social media, backlinks, speaking engagements, all of that, donor base, employees, you name it. It's a business. Now imagine a court suddenly orders you to change your name. That's a very different conversation than changing a name of a podcast just 3, 6, 12 months after launch. That kind of reliance is exactly the kind of prejudice that courts look at. Now, another related defense or argument is acquiescence. This isn't merely about waiting, it's about your conduct. Did the trademark owner act in ways that reasonably suggested that they were accepting of the show? Did they know? Did they communicate anything? Did they raise any objections, or did they effectively allow the use to continue through inaction, silence, or even direct comments? So all of that can weigh heavily in these factors. Now, equitable estoppel requires an even higher standard. Usually it means some conduct on the part of the complaining party that reasonably induces reliance. This is a difficult defense to argue, but it's one of the issues that this case raises, and I will be very interested to see what the evidence shows as it develops. So don't assume that the church loses here. Now, I've already seen people online saying, well, they waited 20 years, that's too long, case over. Well, not so fast. Trademark law rarely works that way. This isn't just a statute of limitations kind of an issue, because they can bring the claim related to more recent infringements, right? Now, the church may argue, though, that any confusion has actually increased over time, and that branding evolved, and that the alleged infringement is ongoing, or that protecting consumers from confusion outweighs any delay that might be involved. Those are all arguments that courts have recognized in some circumstances. And that's why predicting the outcome right now would be easy for me to say, would be premature. So what I'll be watching as this case develops are a few things. The actual trademark registrations involved, the goods and services covered by those registrations, the filing dates and first use dates, evidence of actual consumer confusion, whether the church knew about the podcast and when, what kind of communication went on between the parties over the years, whether the court gives significant weight to these laches, acquiescence, or estoppel arguments. All of those issues could have implications far beyond this single dispute. Now, here's what I think is the real headline. This isn't just about Mormon stories. It's about where podcasting is today. We've entered a new era. we're no longer talking about hobbyists recording in spare bedrooms and basements. We're talking about companies, brands, networks, studios, media businesses. This is creator-owned intellectual property, businesses that can be bought and sold and licensed. They can be inherited, and whenever assets become valuable, lawyers will show up. Trademark disputes become inevitable, and that's simply a part of a mature industry. Same thing happened in publishing, same thing happened with radio, with television, software, and now it's happening in podcasting. So, the lesson for every podcaster is that if you are launching a podcast, you need to run a search before you choose your name. Think beyond whether the domain is just, whether that's available. Consider whether someone already owns trademark rights. If you're successful, you should consider registering your own brand as a trademark. Don't copy someone else's branding. And take these kinds of demand letters seriously. And please don't wait until your show is worth hundreds of thousands or even millions of dollars before you think about these issues. Intellectual property is important from the very beginning. So, changing course becomes very, very expensive if you wait too long. Now, I'm going to continue following this case because I think it could become one of the most significant podcast trademark cases we've seen, not because of the religious issues, but because of what it teaches about branding, trademarks, and the evolution of podcasting into a serious industry itself. And whatever the court ultimately decides in this case, one thing is already clear. Your podcast isn't just content anymore. It's a business asset. So treat it like one. Hey, if you found this helpful, I hope you'll subscribe because I will be continuing to follow this case and others as it develops. And I'll translate the legal jargon into plain English so you can focus on building your show without stepping into avoidable legal trouble. Thanks for watching. I'm Gordon Firemark. This is a hot take special episode of Legit Podcast Pro. See you again real soon.